Hello. Today we're going to be turning this empty glass bowl into a beautiful, easy to make terrarium. Let's get right into it. This is a small bowl with dimensions about 5.5 inches across and 4.5 inches tall. The first order of business in creating a terrarium is making a drainage layer so that all of the water can drain out of the soil and the plant's roots don't get soggy. For this, I'm using leca. It's pretty much just small clay balls that work just like gravel, except for me they're a little bit lighter weight so they're easier to carry around in large numbers. We want to pat it down and shift it around so that there's no high or low points on this top surface. As you can see here, it's pretty much level all the way across, and it's not sloping up toward the back or to the sides. Now for what we call the substrate barrier. This is any material that lets water through, but not the dirt, so that the water can reach down into the drainage layer, but all the soil won't fall in and get nasty. For this job, I'm using window screen mesh. It's pretty easy to get a hold of, and it works just fine. Let's start by cutting it to the approximate size of the bowl. Once we think it's about the right size, hold it up to the bowl and make sure it is. If it's not the right size, go ahead and trim all the way around the edges until you have a nice snug fit. It should be just a little bit too big for the space you give it, so that way no dirt can fall around the sides and get down underneath. Now it's time to add the dirt. My standard substrate mix is mostly just used potting soil with a little bit of compost and sphagnum moss mixed in, just to make sure it holds water well and it doesn't squish too much. When you're adding the dirt, make sure you have it slope up toward the back a little bit. This adds the illusion of depth to your terrarium, and it makes it look larger than it actually is. Now we can finally get to scaping this thing. Now we're starting out with a bunch of miscellaneous pebbles. We've got lots of different shapes and sizes and colors here, so it should make for an interesting amount of variety in this scape. Now let's go ahead and take the pebbles and place them into two similarly sized, but not exactly the same size, clumps on either side of the terrarium, leaving a small gap in between them. It should look like a shelf of sorts. I thought this rock was really neat. It looks like it has two different kinds of rocks shoved into each other. Now we're adding rosemary twigs to this. It doesn't have to be rosemary, you can use any sort of branch you like, but I found rosemary seems to be pretty resistant to mold, unlike most of the deciduous ones I find locally. Whatever type you decide to choose, make sure you get something that has a good amount of curve to it, so that way it can wrap around the rocks well. In case you hadn't noticed yet, what we're trying to go for here is almost like sort of tree roots hanging down over the rocks. Don't be afraid to add more than one clump of roots for each clump of rocks as well. It adds more variety if you do that, and it makes it look more natural. Now that we have the rocks put down, we can add a little bit more dirt back behind them, as they'll hold it up. And with the dirt added back behind it, our scape is pretty much finished. It's almost time for the planting. Now you can get a little bit more of a better look at the bowl, without all of those nasty reflections that are so typical of a bowl. Looking at the moss tub, you can see that it looks pretty green, but don't be fooled, that's just the camera. In real life, you can tell that it's mostly just brown with a little bit of green on top. This is not super healthy moss anymore, so we're going to have to get some from other sources. Most of my terrariums need a trim anyway, so let's see what we can get from there. As it turns out, not much. The little bit we did get was pretty healthy though, so we're probably going to end up using this for the foreground. This amount of moss will actually stretch over a fairly big area, but this isn't nearly enough for the entire terrarium, so we're going to have to get more from outside. And so we put away the dead body of the Grinch, put on our Crocs, and get ready to head outside. Hey, before we head outside, I want to show you how you can salvage some of your moss. First you find some bits that have lots of green on them, and then you just trim off all the brown. It's that easy. Keep doing this until you either have enough moss for whatever you need it for, or you run out of moss. And while we're here, please subscribe. Thank you. See how much more we got from that moss that we thought we couldn't use earlier? Isn't that awesome? Alright, now let's head outside. Okay, now we're outside at the base of this cherry tree. There's a pretty good sized patch of Menzies tree moss on this root here, down where it's damp on the ground. We can take a small part of the patch for us to use, but make sure you don't take the entire thing, otherwise it's not going to regrow and you'll run out of moss. There's a little bit of an extra large bald spot here, so we're going to put a little bit of moss back in the hopes that it's going to grow back and cover the whole thing. This patch of moss grew over a rock and it's stuck inside. Now moving on to another patch of moss that's nearby. This stuff is all just Men's tree moss, same thing as before, but we're just getting more. And after one last little patch, we can move on to another spot. Coming down the side yard, you can see that the ground here is more covered in leaf litter than where we were before. I was hoping that this would mean there would be different types of moss, but we really only got one new species. After clearing away the leaf litter, you can see that this is actually a pretty large patch of moss, which means we don't have to be quite as careful about taking small bits from each patch. Just make sure that you don't take too large of patches from the same area, or else it'll take a long time to grow back. Alright, we're back inside now. Time to clean off the moss. We're going to start out with an empty plastic tub. Any type works, any size works, just so long as you can fit all your moss in it and it holds water. Stick the moss inside the tub and start cleaning off any sticks, twigs, pine needles, or any leaves that got stuck in the moss. Just a quick warning, this method of preparing the moss won't leave you with nice clean green sheets of moss like if you just picked the moss and stuck it on your thing, but it's very good for cleaning large quantities of moss at once. So this is what I use when it's large moss that grows all bushy anyway. Back to the moss. We're adding probably about 2/3 a gallon of water, but I probably could have gotten away with about half a gallon here. And then we're just gonna squirt the moss all around in the water and get it all clean. Don't worry about trying to keep the clumps of moss together. They're gonna fall apart. It just doesn't work very well with this method. Once I'm satisfied with how clean the moss is after the first time, we can go ahead and fish out all the moss. Just fish out all the moss you can, give it a gentle squeeze to remove all the water, and place it into the tub. Keep going until you have all the moss out of the tub. Once I'm satisfied there's nothing left inside, I go ahead and just take the tub and dump all the dirty water outside. Now we do that all over again to remove any last bits of dirt that are still hiding in the moss. Even after just pouring the water on, you can see just how brown the dirt makes it. Makes you kind of glad that we rinsed it off a second time, doesn't it? After our second rinse, we can go ahead and take all the moss and stick it in our tub for the final time. And finally, we're left with a tub full of dirty water we can empty aside, and a smaller tub full of nice green moss. Now it's time to finally add the plants to the terrarium. Start off with a couple of big clumps of the moss we just prepared. We're going to stick this in the background behind all of the rocks and stuff because it's so much taller than the rest of the moss. Now let's go ahead and add the moss trimmings from earlier. We're going to spread these all across the foreground. Just go ahead and take small clumps off of the ball and press them down onto the dirt. Now we give all the moss a good spray down, just to make sure it's nice and damp. After you're done with all these steps, it's nice to just make sure that all of your hardscape is still where you want it to be. I noticed that one of my twigs had fallen over, so I fixed it. Now we're taking pea pebbles. We're going to go ahead and place them along the front of our larger rocks, and they'll make the transition from the rocks to the foreground a little bit smoother and make it look more natural. For the main focus of this terrarium, we're going to include some petunias in the background. Their beautiful detailed leaves will really nicely complement the hardscape choice and the color of the moss. I really like the way the white petunias look, but I think a couple of pink petunias will also really contrast with them and make it look so much better. One of the Photonia cuttings had kind of crispy leaves, but at the time of recording this audio, it seems to have bounced back really well. I tried to place the more colorful Photonias in places where their colors will really make as much of a difference as they can, without including too much color at once. We added one not very colorful red Photonia in the background. It's pretty small right now, but eventually it's going to grow up and be really nice, big, and red. Just giving you a bit of a different angle so that way you could see each of the pink, and red Photonias that don't show up very well from the other angle.
Kevin?
Yeah. Okay.